Well, you're listening to this podcast. However, I wonder if you've ever thought about becoming a guest on a podcast yourself. Why would you ever want to do that? Well, perhaps you've got something compelling to share with the world. Perhaps there is some area of your leadership or your experience or expertise that needs to get out to the masses. Perhaps you're deciding it's time for me to develop myself as an authority in a very specific segment of my expertise. Well, I'm going to have Noémi Beres, who helps entrepreneurs and business owners enrich their lives. I can't wait for you to listen in. I'm Dr. Nate Sala, and this is a call to leadership. Noémi, so good to have you on the show.
Thank you, Dr. Nate, for having me on your show today. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. So we got connected through the podcast world, and you are a person who connects people in the podcast world. You also are an expert in some areas of podcasting. Interesting conversation around this. We haven't talked about this on the show, but why someone should be on a podcast. We're going to unroll this conversation. It's important because I found even through podcasting, it's created openings to doors. It's created greater opportunity for sharing content. It's created better, sometimes, relationships. And so unpacking that with you is going to be really important for our listener. So first of all, let's talk a little bit about your background in the podcasting world.
Well, my background started in 2020. That was like an accidental happening that I ended up in the podcasting world. Before that, between 2007 and 2020, I had an online travel-related business with my husband. And I was doing content creation, social media marketing, blog writing, travel writing. But then COVID hit and the business collapsed and the whole travel industry with that. So we had to find another source of income. So we were lucky because we came across like a mentoring program for podcast agents, like future podcast agents. And it was a low investment program, and we had to make a quick decision to, just to do something and to start a new business. So basically, that's how I ended up in running a podcast agency.
Right. And
it was like short story. Like that was like in a nutshell. It was a bit longer than that, but in a nutshell, it was a quick decision.
Well, and 2020, of course, we know many things changed in 2020, especially the pandemic. It changed how we communicate. Our interaction levels, face-to-face, in person, pretty much disappeared around the world. You're in Cyprus. Yeah. I'm here in the United States. Around the world, we all were faced with this. How do we still connect? How do we still communicate? How do we still get our message out? And of course, podcasting. I started my podcast, at least preparing in late 2020 and then into 21 and 22, and then officially launched in 22. And it's interesting to even talk about this because 10 years ago, we weren't really talking about podcasts. Yes, they were out there. Yes, it was active in some ways, but now it is an amazing medium to really share valuable information.
Absolutely. I agree with that 100%. I mean, before 2020, I didn't listen to podcasts. So I had to learn a lot about podcasting and podcasts, but, it's a learning curve for sure. And I really enjoyed that. And I learned so much about the podcasting world. And while you are being a guest in interviews, you learn so much during the conversation or from the hosts. So I think it's a brilliant opportunity to just learn and broaden your knowledge about basically anything and everything. And
yeah, absolutely. Well, let's break that down. So someone who is interested in becoming a guest, perhaps you don't want to have your own show, but I'm listening to your program, Nate, and I think maybe there's a medium for me to share my message. What are some of the reasons why someone would want to become a podcast guest? And perhaps we can then talk about some of the benefits and the ways to do that.
Of course. I mean, first of all, you connect with a network of hosts. So you're connecting with people, this human connection element to it. And I think that's really important. That's the first step. Because when you reach out to a host, I mean, that's the first point of connection. So you get in touch with them, you build a relationship with them. And then when you have a good pitch and it's a unique one and you can end up on their show and you can share your knowledge. But first of all, it is the human connection and the networking with people Because sometimes you just think, okay, I just send out my pitches to many hosts, but they have to be personalized. They have to be unique in order to get accepted or to be accepted on different shows. And you have to find your niche as well. That's also an important factor.
Absolutely. And it's important you mentioned that, the network piece. As I began to have people on my show who I didn't know who they were, you've introduced me to several wonderful guests. And just getting to know them and our shared understanding of a specific aspect of leadership. Of course, my podcast is on leadership, but interviewing and having conversations with other leaders who I would not have access to otherwise because of this medium has broadened even my network of leaders. And also, as you stated earlier, it broadens my understanding. Even as a host, it broadens my understanding. And then when I go to speak with others on their shows, it creates a deeper understanding, a deeper connection. And then, for example, I was on a show about dads, and I was talking about my experience as a father, as a business owner, and the challenges that you have running a business and having a family and all of the responsibilities, and you want to manage those effectively. And I've learned over the years not to focus on balancing work and life, but really creating a masterpiece of work and life. In other words, it's very difficult to balance. It's very difficult to have equal weighting in every area of your life. But what you can do is we can create a harmony and invite your different members of your life to join in creating this beautiful symphony. And so as I describe this vision, if you will, that I have of my own life and my family's life, and how it intertwines with my business life and my community and my faith matters. The person who was interviewing me said, "Hey, would you at some point like to speak at one of our events?" And I said, perhaps if it all worked out, I'd love to do that. But the point is that it opens new doors for more relationships, more opportunities. And it's such an interesting place, this podcasting world, to create new connections.
Absolutely. And those are obviously not in-person connections, but virtual connections. I think we are as important as in-person connections because we're living in like kind of a new world. And we couldn't connect, obviously, if there wasn't this new world and Zoom and Riverside and everything and podcasts. So I think it just opened up a whole new way of life and business and relationships. So I think it's pretty fascinating to live in it. A lot of things changed, but I think there's a lot of good things came with it as well, bad too, but good as well.
Well, yeah, just the Zoom and the internet and the virtual conversations now, I find I would much rather have a conversation with someone via video than via telephone. Most of my conversations with clients or prospects or engagements are so I can see a face, I can see a smile, I can see expressions, and now the phone call has actually turned into something that is less desirable, at least for me. Now, of course, some aren't that way, but just to your point is that there's been so many changes, and that creates more and more opportunities. At first, when I was working on my show, I only wanted to have people who were in town and can sit at my studio, and then I realized, wow, there's so many more people in the world who I can interact with and have great conversations with. So if there's someone who's a leader and they want to share perhaps some of their experience, or they want to begin to gain some momentum on a stage, they may feel at first like, wow, being on a podcast is very intimidating. And I'm in front of, I don't know how many people, and we've had over close to 150,000 downloads. So you can imagine there's a lot of folks who are listening, and that's just my show. There's people with millions and millions and tens of millions of downloads. And what do you say to someone who's a little apprehensive about this process?
I think it's still easier to be on a podcast show than to be on a stage. I mean, I did both, and I think it's quite nerve-wracking when you have to just stand in front of people. I mean, obviously, you do that too because you're a speaker as well. But I think it's just so easier just to sit in your own home office and sit in front of your mic and the computer and just you share your knowledge. While when you are on a stage, you have to dress up, you have to behave in a certain mode or show up in a certain way. So I think like podcast guesting is just so much easier. I started podcast guesting about Yeah, maybe not in the first year when we started our business, but the second. So it's like 2 years I've been doing podcast interviews, and I really enjoy it. Because you don't see other faces, only the host. It's like human conversation. It's like two people, talk together. It's nothing. Now you mentioned how many downloads you got. It's getting scarier. But I think it just it's a normal conversation between two people about a certain topic, and you don't really have to focus on other who will listen to it. So you just,
it's just my opinion. Yeah, in a way, you're right. Yeah, it is, and it does change it does change, I think, in a lot of ways, the apprehension, because especially if you're just having a conversation with a podcast host who is personable and who asks questions that are easy, you'll find that this is actually a very enjoyable experience. And you're right. It is different than public speaking, because you're not looking at 50 or 500 or 5,000 people. You're looking at one person. In fact, it reminds me of, and I don't remember the king's name, and it's the King of England at the time of the Second World War, and his name escapes me, but he had a speech impediment, and he had trouble speaking to all of the people of England because he would get nervous. Well, he had a speech therapist who asked everyone to leave the room when the king was going to give a speech about the war, and just the speech therapist and the king speaking, and he didn't have any impairment at that time. And it's interesting because if you could just focus on that one person and having that conversation, and this also is important for public speaking when you're speaking to a large audience as well. I used to teach public speaking at one of the universities. I taught it years ago, and focusing on maybe 1 to 2 sets of eyes and scanning the room corner to corner of people who are engaged and smiling or coming in, and that's your audience, and that is who you're speaking with. It can release some of that tension and allow you just to be free flowing. But however, people are nervous naturally. Yeah. When you've been a guest and you've been in this world for some time now. For those who aren't, it can be a little nervous at first. I think after the first few minutes, generally someone will have the willies, as we call them, start to dissipate from their bodies. Absolutely,
and it also depends on the host as well, like how welcoming, how warm, and how what's the vibe of the interview, because that's also really important. And that always.
Absolutely. And so a recommendation I would have is if you're interested in being on podcasts, then check out the host, check out some other episodes, check out their demeanor and how the kind of questions they ask, and if it's a fit for you. I think that's really important for that best fit. I know I do when I have a potential guest. I have a lot of emails that come in requesting to be on the show. They're just usually leaders and maybe perhaps CEOs and different professionals or coaches in the leadership space. And I will do my due diligence, and I will watch or listen to some of their episodes or recordings as available to see if they're a best fit for this genre, this listener. I think it's really important to do that. I think it's also important to know who the listeners are. What's the demographic of that particular audience, so that whether or not you are a fit for that particular type of listener as well.
Absolutely. I always tell this to my clients as well. Just try to listen 1 or 2 episodes just to get the vibe, get the feeling, and what topics they're covering, and what's the style of the show, what's the style of the host. That's really important to get familiar with. I know because I listen to your podcast, so I'm kind of a fan of it. So I know how you usually have your interviews, but I always tell my clients, just, take your time and just be respectful. So just listen to a couple of episodes. It's important.
Yeah, I agree. And that's the thing, for me, it's just a conversation with 2 people who love whatever the topic is, and sharing that. That's one of the reasons why we wanted to start a podcast, was to go from one to many in these great conversations over the years. And you probably feel the same way when you have these great conversations. People are like, I wish I could have recorded this conversation because so many people would be able to benefit. And the other benefit is it's 100% free content. So what that means is that you get to share your message. It costs people $0. Of course, it does cost them their time, but if it's valuable, then that's an investment in time, not an actual cost, because there's a benefit that comes along with that. So another encouragement that I would have, I'd love for you to speak on this, is the mindset of giving back. If I have something of value to share with the world, and perhaps I'm able to share it with a small audience in my local community or however I do my business, but I want to be able to send this out to the masses. Well, this is a great way to do that. Plus, it continues on and on and on as long as there's people who are willing to listen. What a great tribute to the world.
So true. I mean, you're creating evergreen content, and plus you are basically a guest on that show. As you said, it doesn't really cost you anything because you're just a guest, and then giving back to the host and giving back to the world. What I would love to do for all of my clients is please reshare the content, please repurpose the content, because in a way you say thank you to the host with that. Plus, it's beneficial for you too. It's a win-win situation for both of you, because with that content, you create content for yourself, but you tag the host. You can do it on social media, on LinkedIn, on Instagram, on Facebook, anywhere. And I see people, they're doing that and they look like they are on shows all the time, but they actually not. They're just resharing and repurposing the content in a very, very clever way. And then you building authority, you're building a brand with resharing your content all the time and repurposing it, because people will see you everywhere. They type your name into Google and it's like, okay, that person will, come up all the time, and it's becoming an authority in their field. So I think that's really important.
Agreed. Yeah, the authority piece, building your brand. Oh yeah, it's so good. And as you said, you can get 4, 5, 6, 10, maybe even 15 clips out of one interview. And that is a great way to share the message. I like to share on LinkedIn every so often, and even just the clips. And sometimes people say, wow, you are just doing so much. Not really. It just appears that way. Yeah. And it's good. It's good for the relationships. It's good for the credibility. It opens new doors, and it helps to, and also I think it helps us when we are going to be a guest on a program to refine our message, refine our communication, and really think through these important pieces of how we can add more value to the message.
Exactly. I mean, that's so important. Add value to the show and share your knowledge with the audience. And I noticed that sometimes, like some guests, they just misinterpret things because they think a podcast interview is an advertisement, but it's not. I mean, it's not for them, it's for the audience. Your job is to share knowledge and help them to learn something about you, about your business. Obviously, you're going to advertise your service maybe at the end of the show, but you have to provide value and you have to add value to the show.
Yeah. You've done some great work with me, and I love how you present your potential guests for my program and giving me potential topics, areas of expertise. What do you recommend for someone who's interested in being on a podcast as a guest in terms of preparation with documenting their expertise?
Really important to have a one sheet. I mean, not all of my clients have one, but it's good to have one, a nicely prepared one sheet with all the important information about yourself, topics, about your bio, your headshot, your social links, maybe previous interviews, links to them. And then obviously you need a bio, not too long, not too short, but somewhere in the middle, like a sweet one. And then obviously you need to have your website and your social links ready, a nice professional headshot. It's also important. And the most important things are the topics, because those are that you were going to mention and talk about during an interview. So you have to really prepare for those. And we can't just wing those topics because we always have to prepare and know what to talk about and what kind of knowledge we want to share. So that I always advise my clients, just get like 3 topics with a couple of talking points ready. So that will help the host to decide if they want you on the show or they don't. And it will help them to prepare for the interview. So the conversation, it's, more free flowing, and it's a big help for them.
Agreed. Yeah, that's really important. It's been really important for me to scan those topics when I'm as a podcast host to identify whether or not this topic will resonate with my listener, because at the end of the day, it's about the listener. And for me, I found it to be extremely helpful to see those. And then I've selected a topic, and then I know exactly what kind of questions I might be asking and what type of areas of expertise they're going to be comfortable in, and give them an opportunity, give that guest an opportunity to shine in that area. So it's so important. For example, if I was going to be a guest on a podcast, I would have some areas that I knew that I could really add a lot of value in, for entrepreneurial leadership, for business management, for vision creation and vision execution. So what you say of several, right? Maybe three different areas, and don't overwhelm them with, 10, 15 different areas. Yeah. to tell the podcast host that what their expertise lies. And I think let's give some comfort too. Sometimes you may not be a fit. I may not be a fit on a program. That's okay.
That's okay. We accept that. I had a client once, and he told me that's like, were there any podcasts that didn't accept me? And I told him, no, I'm not going to tell you that. It's like, you don't need to know about that, because obviously everyone has an ego. I mean, and it hurts when somebody...
Rejection.
Rejection hurts. So when somebody says no, I mean, that's another thing, that if you have an agency and you work with an agency, we take the no's and you will only get the yeses. So everyone's happy, and we won't know about the no's. That's okay, and you don't need to know about that.
That's right. Yeah, but the no's are important too, because we want to be set up for the success of our message to reach the people who are best suited for this message. And one thing I think it's important for the person who is interested in being a guest on a podcast, for me, when I had my podcast coach helping me to design the podcast, I had to go through an exercise to identify what's called my ideal client avatar. So this ideal avatar is the ideal person who I would be speaking with on this program, and all of their demographics, where they live, what they eat, their income, their work habits, their hobbies, so on and so forth, so that I could hone into that individual. So if your podcast host has done this work, then they're going to make sure that that particular person is a listener. For example, just right now for this show, I know that some of my listeners, one listener in particular, is saying, boy, I sure would like to be more resonant with my message. I sure would like to be able to get it out to more people and have the credibility and the ability to build my brand and have an authority. And so that's why this conversation with you is important for that listener, so that listener can then take these steps and start to take action. So, which the next question is taking action. How in the world do I find podcasts that will want to hear me and my message?
There are obviously websites to do that. iTunes, that's a good, ways to start. You just try to search for your niche. Basically, if you're a coach, you start, entering leadership or something like a specific term that you want to use. You try with that, and then all the podcasts will come up that are related to that specific term, and then all that are connected. So it's kind of like a rabbit hole. So you just go down and down there, and it's more and more podcasts will appear. So it's a good way to start. But there's also a website called Listen Notes, and if you visit Listen Notes, you can get even more information about specific podcasts, about not the download numbers, but because those are not, everybody thinks that download numbers are open to everybody and it's public. It's not. You won't know that. But you can decide whether you want to be on that show, because they will tell you which percentage that specific show in. For example, when we work with shows, we usually work with podcasts that are in the 5 to 10% of podcasts worldwide. So it's a good way to start with those. You check them, you check the episode numbers, you check ratings, reviews. That's important. So you can decide whether you want to be on the show or not. But the most important is to be in your niche. You have to find those, and you really have to think about what do you want to talk about and what's your work about and what's your message. Because if you know what's your message, what your story is, then you can dig deep into that niche and find those podcasts, because there are a lot of out there, like millions out there. So you have to find a niche and you have to dig deep to find those podcasts for you. But Google is there as well. But I would start with iTunes, start with Listen Notes. Even Spotify can help you with it. I mean, there are a lot of podcasts out there are on Spotify too. So they work in the same way. You just type in, or YouTube. I mean, a lot of podcasts are on YouTube, videos, audios. So yeah, try with those and they will help you.
Absolutely. And I think that you don't have to shoot for Joe Rogan first time.
No,
right?
Please not.
Find one that works for you. I love that approach to look for the listen notes. And I've also, tell me what you think about this. I've heard that podcasts usually don't make it in the 5 to 10% range because they don't stick around long enough. Because a lot of podcasters quit within however many episodes or however many seasons of their show. And coming up on a year, we just celebrated a year of our show. And I can understand how, because it is work for the podcast host. It's work to continue to have consistency. It takes a tremendous amount of discipline. And for us, the long range goal is to create a wonderful library of leadership tools for our listener, for our audience. A little selfishly, for my son, who's 16 currently, although he says, "Dad, I get to hear you all the time. I don't know if I need to listen to your podcast." But in the future, maybe it'll be a reservoir for him to say, "Oh, wow, I wonder what my dad said about this," to a particular kind of person. So we continue on. And of course, the bigger picture, not just from an individual level, is so that our listener can benefit from it, because not everyone can access me as a leadership coach, as a person who can help them, but as an individual, but they can tune in and they can listen to the show. I say all that to say, perhaps that there's also an opportunity for people when they see how many actual episodes and how long the show has been going. Perhaps that's another indicator that, wow, if I was on a show that was around for a year to 2 years and there's 100, 150, 200 episodes, then perhaps this show will continue on and I'll be able to have my message out even more frequently.
Absolutely. And it's so the trend, especially after COVID. And when COVID stopped, there are a lot of shows stopped because people went back to work. Because when COVID started, everybody started a podcast. Like they just wanted to talk. They just wanted to share their message because they were lonely and they needed a place to share what they think about the world and how they feel. And what I saw, that there were many podcasts stopped after 6-10 episodes, and that was it. And they never came back. But obviously, consistency, persistency they are so important when it comes to podcast guesting or podcast hosting as well. I mean, that's the same. You really have to stick to it. And I know, because I work with a lot of hosts, it's a lot of work. It costs money, it costs energy, time to be a podcast host. And you really need persistence and consistency doing that. But then you're giving so much to the world and you're sharing so much knowledge with people. And sometimes I had this podcast, they stopped after 200 episodes, and I was sad because it's like, that's a shame. They should have continued it, but obviously we don't know the story.
The circumstances. I would say even continuing it on a lighter frequency, even if it's once a week, if it was twice a week. Well, we were at 3 times a week for an entire year. And 3 times a week is a lot. That is a massive amount of recording. And after 1 year, we went down to 2 times a week. And I had one of my listeners ask me, they said, "Oh my goodness, I was afraid you were going to stop doing it because your format changed." Like, no, even if it's once a week or even if it's once a month, there will always be, hopefully, an opportunity to share more and more content through this medium.
Absolutely, yeah. We should just decrease the number, but you're still in touch with your listeners, then they are happy with that, I think.
Yeah, they get to know you.
Exactly.
Yeah, they get to know you. They get to know your life, and of course they get to know you through your guests. And that's the other thing, is that the podcast host is looking for great. If they do want interviews, they want great people who are in that niche. So encourage you, if you're considering the next step of you sharing your message on a broader context, highly consider it. And you you help people with this, right?
Right. Yeah. We help them. We'd get on quality podcast shows. As one of my clients told me, it's not you just getting on podcast shows. You are enrich people's lives through connection. It's like, yeah, that's very nicely put. But it's basically like a PR agency for podcast, and you represent them and you help them to get on these quality podcast shows like yours and other shows I'm connected with. And yeah, that's what we do. And yeah, in a nutshell.
Well, and it's very valuable, and I'm glad we've been connected. I'll make sure to have your contact in our show notes. So anyone who's listening today will be able to take advantage of the ability they have to get a greater reach through a service such as yours.
Thank you so much.
It's very valuable, Noemi. Thank you so much. This has been great. I know that our listener has benefited, and hopefully we'll get to see some of the benefit from that as they begin to spread their wings and share more of their message in the podcast world.
Thank you so much for having me today.